So I'm Phil Libin. I'm the CEO of Evernote. I think that what we're working on really is the next big thing, the next big thing in technology, the next big thing in business. So this follows the trend that everyone's familiar with before, where people think that the interesting thing about computers, the interesting thing about technology is that they're always getting smaller and more powerful and cheaper. This has been expressed many times. You just see the trend of development of computers going all the way from back when they used to fill a house to when they were kind of the size of a large piece of furniture to something you can put on your desk or something you can have in your bag. But I think the actual much more important factor isn't so much the computers are getting smaller, it's that they're getting closer to your head, literally. That computers, and I don't just mean phones, I mean just about everything, are devices that you are interacting with more and more personally because you physically have them close to your face. You're getting closer and closer and closer. You're wearing them on your ear. You're looking at them straight. 10, 20 years, you'll have them in a chip in your head. And so the times when you're not using a computer, which used to be pretty much your entire life, and then went to most of the time, and then every few hours, the time that you're not using a computer right now is really getting diminishingly small. You're pretty much always doing something, and this is enabling the next generation, the next giant leap forward in technology, where you're always have a brain augmentation. You're always doing something more powerful with your head and with the brain, and I think this is the opportunity that's going to propel us forward very quickly over the next couple of years. And this is the industry that I think Evernote is in. We're trying to make an external brain for everyone, something that helps you remember everything. But I think there's plenty of other opportunities left in this space. As a CEO of a small startup, I have ample free time. So one day I was just sitting around and I thought I would just play with cool stuff. And so I got my DNA swabbed. This is from DecodeMe, one of the companies that you send in a sample of your DNA, and they do a full sequence, and they give you your ancestry and medical history and whatever. 23andMe does a great job of this too, but they came out 24 hours later than DecodeMe, and by that time my spit was already on a plane across the Atlantic, so it was too late. So I did this with DecodeMe, and the results came back, and you can trace back your lineage, and you can see who your ancestors were. And this was really cool, and it turns out that one of my ancestors is Stephen Colbert, which was a great result. As an engineer, and I'm sure for other engineers, you would appreciate this. This is sort of a proof point. When you see a data point like this was just obviously correct, you just say, yeah, that's plausible. That really means that the system is probably working. It's obvious in hindsight. And of course, Stephen Colbert and I have lots of stuff in common, and it's easy for me to, I think, see the world through his eyes. But I thought, well, what if I try to see the world through the eyes of, my more primitive ancestors, people for whom the experience of the world must have been totally different than it is for Stephen and for myself. So I looked back further, and I looked at Katie Couric and a more distant ancestor of mine, which is Otzi the Iceman. Otzi the Iceman was a guy who lived about 5,300 years ago in the area which is kind of on the border between Austria and Italy today. And Otzi and I have a lot in common. Facial hair. We both liked nuts and berries. We both enjoy a good pair of leggings. Otzi was a skilled metallurgist and knew how to make copper axes. I know how to make copper axes in World of Warcraft. He was a family man, a hunter, an admirer of tattoos, and he was murdered. Got into a fight, was shot in the back by multiple wooden arrows that actually pierced his heart from his back, and then he was left face down in a stream to die, where he was frozen. And about 5,300 years later, he was found in miraculously good condition by a group of German tourists, who then demonstrated just how much progress society had made in those 5,300 years by immediately suing each other over who had the rights to actually find the first discovery. But when I read about this, when I heard about Otzi, after I got rid of my lust for revenge, I thought, wow, we've really come a long way. I mean, my body is in every way better, more powerful than that of my frozen caveman ancestor. Pretty much all of my physical capabilities have been augmented by many orders of magnitude by technology. For example, right after finding out that I was related to Otzi, I had to take a trip to Orlando. Don't know why. It took me about 5 hours, San Jose to Orlando, about a 5-hour flight. And I thought, I wonder how long this would have taken Otzi to do. So luckily, Google Maps has this feature where you can say, give me the walking directions. So I did that. And they were nice enough to do it, and it basically says, sure, yeah, if you walk from San Jose to Orlando, it's whatever it is, 2,700 miles, about 37 days of walking. That's maybe a little bit ambitious. That comes out to about 73 miles a day every day, so it's like running 3 marathons back to back. And it does say, there's a little caution there, which I like, which says it may be missing some sidewalks and things like that on the route, which is good. So if you assume that Otzi wasn't as physically fit as the average Google Maps engineer, couldn't run 3 marathons a day, plus with all the missing sidewalks and the swamps and the getting shot in the back with wooden arrows, let's say it would have taken him about a year to do this. I did it in 5 hours. It would have taken him a year. 5 hours versus a year, that's like 1 billion times better. I forgot to do the math. In terms of how far my body could carry me. Same thing with carry weight. Otzi could carry 60, 80 pounds. I just moved a giant truckload of crap from the East Coast to here when I moved. Same thing for the number of people we could talk to. He had a couple of hundred people in his immediate tribe that he could communicate with. I can communicate with hundreds of thousands or millions of people trivially on the blog, on Twitter, or whatever. I did a little experiment yesterday where I just said on Twitter, I said, for the next 2 hours, I'll answer all questions that are tweeted at me. I answered 280 questions, and then Twitter banned me because they thought I was a bot. Otzi couldn't have done that. And basically, in every way, my body's been augmented by technology, except for in one particular thing, which is not everything is improved. My brain is still very, very, very similar to that of my frozen caveman ancestor. Otzi could remember a few hundred facts. That's kind of the memory capacity that he had, a few hundred facts. So he knew many different types of berries and nuts, and how to track certain prey animals, and how to read what the weather is going to be, and how to follow a path, and which small handful of people could be trusted and which are likely to shoot you in the back with wooden arrows. And I've got pretty much the same capacity in my brain. Instead of, nuts and berries, I remember, Simpsons quotes. And instead of, how to track prey, I know, SQL queries. And instead of knowing which people to trust and which are going to shoot you in the back, I just got done raising VC funding, so I actually know exactly the same thing. But our brain capacity is actually quite similar, and hasn't really changed for the intervening 5,000 years, whereas every other aspect of my body and my body's performance has been augmented significantly. This hasn't. And this is the thing that's starting to change very rapidly just in the past few years, with things like computers getting closer to your head, always being on, always letting you communicate, always having Google to look things up, always having Wikipedia, always having communications channels, always having things like Evernote to help you remember. And this often leads to a really interesting question, which is, does this somehow make you less human? Does the reliance on the machine, does the reliance on technology and computers make you less human? And that's a nuanced question. And there's a nuanced answer to it, which is no, it doesn't. It doesn't at all. That's stupid. Don't ask that again. But people still do, and they've been saying the same thing about everything, right? They say, well, but you're going to use that to help you remember. That ruins your real memory. Back when we didn't have these new fabric computers, we actually had to learn stuff. And people would be saying the same thing a few thousand years ago about the invention of writing. There would be some village elders saying, kids today's with their writing, it totally corrupts their brain. We used to have a rich oral tradition where we had to remember everything by sitting around the campfire, and now you can just write it down. That's totally, bad for you. This is an endless argument, and I actually think that this makes you a better person. It makes you more human. One very quick personal anecdote of that is I am completely useless when it comes to directions. I have no sense of direction. I never know where the hell I am. I can't find my way around driving, just far worse than average. And this was a major deal for me. This was always a big source of inconvenience in my life for many years. Whenever I would have to go somewhere in business, I'd have to set aside an extra 2-3 hours to get lost and rent a car and stop and ask for directions. Also really bad at asking for directions. This was a source of a lot of anxiety for me. And then about 10 years ago, it disappeared completely. Because obviously of the invention of GPS, right? GPS became ubiquitous about 10 years ago. Every single car I was in had it, every phone had it. And all of a sudden, 10 years ago, I went from being, really bad at this certain thing to being just as good as anyone else. And it made me feel great. It freed up all this time. It made me a better person. Same kind of thing that we're working on with Evernote with just memory. You can't remember a third of what you wanted to. Within Evernote, you can. That makes you better. That frees up your brain of thinking about other things, and it leads to all sorts of economic possibilities. So many of you probably know this chart. This is from Kurzweil's "The Singularity is Near." It's a plot of major advancements, major leaps forward in basically the history of the planet. And the whole point here is that interesting things are happening at roughly doubling of the rate that it used to be. So back from when the Earth first sort of cooled, it took a couple of billion years for the first interesting thing to happen. Let's say continents to form. And then the next kind of interesting event maybe only took about a billion years. And then after that you passed from geologic time to evolutionary time, and life came around, and things started happening every couple of 100 million years. You had organisms, complex organisms, came out of the oceans and started walking around on land. Things started evolving faster and faster. Then you moved to an area where you were in historical time, cultural time, and things were happening every couple of thousand years. You had, the invention of fire and the wheel, and then cooking, and then agriculture, and then you had actual, societies and cultures and history, and things started happening every couple of hundred years. And then things went on to, scientific time frame where you had inventions and discoveries, and really it took decades to move you forward, and then years, and then months, and then weeks. And right now we're at a point where fundamentally significant things that can affect all of us are changing very quickly in the scope of single-digit years, sometimes sooner, sometimes quicker. So we can all think back just 2 years ago with the things that we didn't have, Twitter and stuff like that. Yeah, Twitter may not be exactly as important as the invention of fire, but really, like it's not a completely order of magnitude different thing in terms of its effect on numbers of people and percentage of the world. And when you look at the rate of progress, it's very much right now gone from geological time to historical time to cultural time to scientific time, and now it's at technological time. It's basically following Moore's law. Things are getting better and faster and cheaper, roughly doubling every year. Computers, technology, software are getting closer and closer to your head. This is the real engine that's going to move us forward, move us out of any problems that we currently have. Obviously, there's one hiccup to all this, which is the torch-wielding mob. You should never underestimate the retardant power of the torch-wielding mob. If you look at the fun that we're having just trying to ensure more people with healthcare, you can see how when you try to do bigger and more interesting things and the kinds of changes that will be required by this in society, that it's actually not going to be nearly as easy as maybe geeks like me would like it to be. So there's always going to be things holding us back, but at the end of the day, there's this inevitable progress of your brain being the last final thing that up to now has remained almost completely unchanged and unimproved since your frozen caveman ancestor days. It's finally starting to crack. It's finally starting to move at technological speed. The results of that are going to be really, I think, pretty breathtaking. And leave you with one thought, which is what I think is the best leading economic indicator. No one is sure right now about exactly what the state of the long-term economy is. Have we hit a wall? Have we fundamentally slowed down? Are our children or grandchildren going to be much worse off than we are right now? No one's really sure how to read it. Some signs are better, some signs are worse. I think there's really only one major indicator to look at, which is basically which is Moore's law. Originally stated as the number of processors in a chip basically doubling every year, but then usually taken to mean that technology gets twice as powerful or half as expensive every year, 18 months or so. And this is really all you need to look at, because the interesting thing about Moore's law is that it's not actually a law. There's nothing that guarantees that this will happen. It's actually an observation, and it's measurable, and you can measure it. And there's nothing that says that it has to continue. It just has continued for about 30 years. And so you can look at Moore's law, and you can look at the performance of this in 6 months and in a year, and you can actually say, like, has it continued to hold up? Have processors continued to get faster or cheaper? And if the answer is yes, then this is the main thing that powers all of progress, all of inventions, all of the business trends in the past couple of decades. It isn't what's going on Wall Street or the real estate bubble or anything like that. It's this stuff. And of course, it may not hold up. So if you check it in 6 months and it actually turns out that prices of technology have stayed about the same, things haven't gotten cheaper, things haven't gotten more powerful, then you can start worrying. Then maybe this fundamental engine has slowed down. but it hasn't yet. I'm betting it's not going to. In fact, I'm betting it'll accelerate, because if anything, if an extra 5% of the really bright people from college in this economic environment decide not to go, not to get MBAs, but to, do something useful with their life, it'll probably actually increase this growth. You can look at it and you can see what's going on. And my guess is, if you check this in 6 months, you check it in a year, you check it in 2 years, it continues to accelerate, and this will power us through any issues that we currently have.